Hi guys. So I'm gonna read to Secret of the Old Clock, and last time we ended on chapter 9. So I'm just gonna read the last bit from chapter 9 and then I'm gonna continue on to chapter 10. Now if only she could figure out how to see the old clock. As if Ada had read the visitor's thoughts, she said airily, "We have some really fine pieces up at the cottage, Nancy. If you ever get up that way, drop in to see them. The caretaker will show you around." "Oh, thank you so much for everything," Nancy said, trying hard to conceal her excitement. As the door closed behind her, Nancy grinned in anticipation. "What luck," she told herself. "Moon Lake, here I come." So now we're on chapter 10, Following a Clue. With soaring spirits, Nancy walked homeward. "I wonder," she thought, "how the Tophams will feel about Josiah Crowley's old clock if it costs them the inheritance they're counting on." At dinner that night, Nancy chatted with unusual animation, deciding not to tell of her exciting plans until after Hannah had served dessert. Mr. Drew, however, sensed that big news was coming. "My dear," he said, laying a hand on his daughter's arm, "you look like the cat that swallowed the canary. What's the big scoop?" Nancy giggled. "Oh, Dad, I just can't keep any secrets from you." Then, as the table was cleared, the young sleuth told of a great stroke of luck. "And just think, Helen invited me to her aunt's camp." "Good," her father commented, smiling. "You can combine business with pleasure, Nancy. Swimming and boating and fun with the girls will provide a much-needed vacation." "May I start first thing in the morning?" his daughter asked. "An excellent idea, Nancy. The change will do wonders for you. Go, by all means." Hurriedly she packed a suitcase, and the next morning was off to an early start. Moon Lake was about a 55-mile drive. One way to go was past the Hoover girls' farm, and Nancy decided to stop there. As she approached the house, the young sleuth heard singing. It was coming from the barn. "How beautiful!" Nancy thought, as the clear soprano voice went through a series of trills and flute-like scales. In a moment, the singer appeared, and Nancy teasingly applauded. Allison's eyes danced. "Thanks, I was just trying to imitate some of the greats." "Oh, you'll be great yourself one of these days," Nancy prophesied. "Not unless I get some money to finance lessons," Allison said. "Any luck, Nancy?" "Sort of. I've had a little luck." At this moment Grace appeared and instantly invited Nancy to stay, but the young detective said she too had work to do. "I hope to have a good report for you soon," she added, and waved goodbye. Here's a picture. Grace's face brightened, and Allison declared cheerfully, "Then there's still hope? We are so lucky to have you as a friend, Nancy. Come and see us again soon, please." Resuming her journey, Nancy soon branched off from the river road and headed toward Moon Lake. As she drove along, her thoughts revolved constantly around the Crowley relatives and the Hoovers. She sighed. How different things would be for them if Josiah Crowley hadn't been so secretive. Her reverie was ended by the sudden strange actions of her car. It kept veering to the left of the road in spite of her efforts to keep it in the middle. With foreboding, Nancy stopped and got out to make an inspection. As she had suspected, a rear tire was flat. "Oh dear," she murmured in disgust. "Such luck." Though Nancy was able to change a tire, she never relished the task. Quickly, she took out the spare tire from the rear compartment, found the jack and lug wrench, and went to work. By the time her job was completed, she was hot and a little breathless. "Whew!" she exclaimed as she started on her way again. "I'll be ready for a nice cool swim in Moon Lake." It was after 12 o'clock when she came in sight of Camp Avondale, run by Helen's aunt. Through the tall trees Nancy caught a glimpse of cabins and tents. Beyond, the blue lake sparkled and glimmered in the sunlight. As Nancy drove into the camp, a group of girls gathered around her car. Helen came running out cabin to greet her chum. "Girls, it's Nancy Drew!" she exclaimed joyfully and made introductions. Nancy did not know any of the campers, but in no time they made her feel warmly welcome. "Nancy," said Helen, "park your car at the side of the dining hall and then come and have lunch." "Oh, that sounds wonderful," Nancy laughed. "I'm nearly starved." First she was escorted to the main building where she met Aunt Martha, the camp director, and registered. "May she stay with me?" Helen asked. "Certainly, dear, and I hope you have a splendid time, Nancy." "Oh, I'm sure I will, Aunt Martha." As the two girls walked off, Nancy told Helen about selling the charity dance tickets and gave her the money paid by Mr. Topham. "He surely was generous," Helen commented in surprise. Then she smiled wryly. "I have a feeling he did it more for social prestige than sympathy for the cause." Nancy scarcely had time to deposit her suitcase under her cot and freshen up after the long ride when lunch was announced by the ringing of a bell. Campers hurried from all directions to the dining hall. The food was plain but appetizing, and Nancy ate with zest. The meal over, she was rushed from one activity to another. The girls insisted that she join them in a hike. Then came a cooling dip in the lake. Nancy enjoyed herself immensely, but the Crowley mystery was never far from her mind. "I must find out where the Tophams' cottage is located," she reminded herself, and next managed to go there alone. Nancy's opportunity to accomplish the first part of her quest came when Helen suggested about 5 o'clock, "How about we go for a ride around the lake in the camp launch? There's just some time before supper." "Oh, wonderful!" Nancy accepted readily. "By the way, can you see many of the summer cottages from the water?" "Oh, yes, lots of them." Helen led her friend down to a small dock, and with 4 other girls climbed into the launch, a medium-sized craft. As one of the campers started the motor, Helen remarked, "It's always a relief to us when this engine starts. Once in a while it balks, but you never know when or where." "Yes," spoke up a girl named Barbie, "and when you're stuck this time of year, you're stuck. There are hardly any cottages up here yet, so their boats are still in winter storage." As the little launch turned into the lake, Nancy was entranced with the beautiful sight before her. The delicate azure blue of the sky and the mellow gold of the late afternoon sun were reflected in the shimmering surface of the water. "What a lovely scene for an oil painting," she thought. As they sped along, however, Nancy kept glancing at the cottages intermingled with tall evergreen trees that bordered the shoreline. "The Tophams have a bungalow up here, haven't they?" she questioned casually. "Yes, it's across the lake," Helen replied. "We'll come to it soon." "Is anyone staying there now?" "Oh, no, the cottage is closed. It's being looked after by Jeff Tucker, the caretaker. He's the tallest, skinniest man I have ever seen outside of a circus." "Is it hard to get to the place?" "Not if you go by launch, but it's a long way if you take a road around the lake." Helen looked at her friend. "I didn't know you were particularly interested in the Tophams, Nancy." "Oh, they're not friends of mine, as you know," Nancy returned hastily. "I was merely curious." After a time, as the launch slowed down and chugged along close to shore, Helen pointed out a wide path through the woods. At the end of it stood a large rambling white cottage. "That's the Topham place," she said. Trying not to appear too eager, Nancy looked intently at the bungalow. She made a quick mental note of its location. "Tomorrow I'll visit that place and try to solve the mystery," she told herself. Chapter 11. An Unexpected Adventure. Nancy awoke the next morning to the fragrant odor of pines. Eager to start out for the Topham bungalow, she dressed quickly, but in her plans she had reckoned without Helen Corning and her friends. From the moment breakfast was over, Nancy was swept into another whirlwind of adventure by the campers of Avondale. The entire day passed without a chance for her to break away. "Oh, Helen," Nancy groaned as she tumbled into bed that night. "Tennis matches, canoe races, swimming, water skiing. It's been fun, but tomorrow I think I will stay out of the activities." Helen laughed gaily. "You'll change your mind after a sound sleep, Nancy. Wait and see." For answer, Nancy murmured a sleepy good night, but even as she slipped into slumber, she vowed that in the morning she would not be deterred again from visiting the Topham summer place. After breakfast the next day Nancy stood firm in her resolve. When Helen urged her to accompany the girls on an all-day hike, Nancy shook her head. "Thanks a lot, but please excuse me today, Helen." Normally Nancy would have loved going on such a hike, but she had to achieve her plan of sleuthing. Helen, though disappointed, heeded her friend's plea and trudged off with the other campers into the woods. As soon as they were out of sight, Nancy leaped into action. After obtaining Aunt Martha's permission to use the launch, she hurried down to the dock. Nancy had frequently handled motorboats and was confident that she could manage this one. Now, full speed ahead for the Tophams. To her delight, the motor started immediately, and Nancy steered out into the lake. As the launch cut through the water, a cool spray blew into her face. The young sleuth felt a thrill of excitement as she guided the craft toward her destination, which might hold a solution to the mystery. "If only the Topham's caretaker will let me in when I get there," she thought. Nancy's heart beat somewhat faster as she neared her goal, but all of a sudden there was a sputter from the engine. The next instant, to Nancy's utter dismay, the motor gave one long wheeze and died. "Oh!" she cried out loud. Nancy knew that the engine had plenty of fuel, for she had checked this before departing. A moment later she recalled Helen's remark about the engine becoming balky at times. With a sigh of impatience at the unexpected delay, Nancy examined the motor. For over an hour she worked on it, trying every adjustment she could think of, but her efforts were useless. There was not a sound of response from the motor. "What miserable luck," she said out loud. "Of all the days the motor to conk out, this means I won't get to the Topham cottage after all." For a moment Nancy was tempted to swim ashore. To be so close to the bungalow and not to be able to reach it was tantalizing, but she resisted the impulse. She could not leave the boat stranded. It would drift off and she would be responsible. "I'll just have to wait for a passing boat to rescue me," Nancy decided. But fate was against her. The hours dragged by and not another craft appeared in sight. Nancy became increasingly uncomfortable as the hot sun beat down on her. Also, she was growing weak from hunger. "And worst of all," Nancy thought gloomily, "another whole day is being wasted. I want to get to the bottom of this mystery." To occupy her mind, Nancy concentrated once more on the motor. Determinedly she bent over the engine. It was not until the sun sank low in the sky that she sat up and drew a long breath. "There," she declared, "I've done everything. If it doesn't start now, it never will." To her relief and astonishment, it responded with a steady roar as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Nancy lost no time in heading back toward camp. She dared not attempt to visit the bungalow since it would be very dark soon. When finally she eased up to the dock, Nancy saw Helen and her friends awaiting her. They greeted her with delight. "Oh, we were just going to send out a search party for you," Helen exclaimed. She stopped abruptly and stared at her friend. "You're sunburnt and covered with grease. What happened?" Nancy laughed. "I had an extended sun bath." Then she gave a light-hearted account of her mishap as the campers trooped back to their cabins. When Helen learned that Nancy had had nothing to eat since breakfast, she went to the kitchen and brought back some food. The following morning the young sleuth decided on her next move. Directly after breakfast she began packing. When Helen entered the cabin she exclaimed in amazement, "Why, Nancy Drew, you're not leaving camp already?" "I'm afraid I'll have to, Helen, right after lunch. I may be back, but I'm not sure, so I'd better take my bag with me." "Don't you like it here?" "Oh, of course," Nancy assured her. "I've had a wonderful time. It's just there's something very important that I must attend to at once." Helen looked at her friend searchingly, then grinned. "Nancy Drew, you're working on some mystery with your father." "Well, sort of," Nancy admitted, "but I'll try to get back, okay?" "Oh, please do," Helen begged. Nancy went to the office to pay Aunt Martha and explain her hasty departure. After lunch she set off in her car to a chorus of farewells from the campers, who sadly watched her depart. She headed the car toward the end of the lake, then took the dirt road leading up to the Topham cottage. Soon she came to a fork in the woods. "Now which way shall I turn for the bungalow?" she wondered. After a moment's hesitation, Nancy calculated that she should turn left toward the water and did so. The going was rather rough due to ruts in the road. Two of them, deeper than the others, apparently had been made by a heavy truck. The tracks appear fresh, Nancy mused. As she drove along, the young sleuth noticed a number of summer cottages. Most of them were still boarded up, since it was early in the season. As she gazed at one of them, the steering wheel was nearly wrenched from her hand by a crooked rut. As Nancy turned the steering wheel to bring the car back to the center of the narrow road, one hand accidentally touched the horn. It blared loudly in the still woods. That must have scared all the birds and animals, Nancy chuckled. Around a bend in the road she caught sight of a white bungalow ahead on the right side of the road. There was no sign at the entrance to the driveway to indicate who the owner was, but a wooded path leading down to the lake looked like the one that she had seen from the water. "I think I'll walk to the shore and look at the cottage from there," Nancy determined. "Then I'll know for sure if this is the place Helen pointed out." Nancy parked at the edge of the road and got out. To her surprise, she observed that the truck's tire marks turned into the driveway. A second set of tracks indicated that the vehicle had backed out and gone on down the road. "Delivering supplies for the summer, no doubt," Nancy told herself. She went down the path to the water, then turned around to look at the cottage. "It's the Tophams, all right," Nancy decided. Instead of coming by way of the path, she decided to take a short cut through the woods. With mounting anticipation of solving the Crowley mystery, she reached the road and hurried up the driveway. "I hope the caretaker is here," she thought. Nancy suddenly stopped short with a gasp of astonishment. Why, the Tophams must be moving out! The front and side doors of the cottage stood wide open. Some of the furniture on the porch was overturned, and various small household items were strewn along the driveway. Nancy bent to examine some marks in the soft earth. She noticed that several were boot prints, while others were long lines, probably caused by dragging cartons and furniture across the lawn. "That must have been a moving van's tracks I saw," Nancy told herself. But the Tophams didn't say anything about moving. She frowned in puzzlement. Her feeling persisted and grew strong as she walked up the steps of the cottage porch. Nancy knocked loudly on the open door. No response. Nancy rapped again. Silence. Where was Jeff Tucker, the caretaker? Why wasn't he on hand to keep an eye on the moving activities? An air of complete desertion hung over the place. There's something very strange about this, she thought. Curious and puzzled, Nancy entered the living room. Again her eyes met a scene of disorder. Except for a few small pieces, the room was bare of furniture. Even the draperies had been pulled from their rods, and all of the floor coverings were gone. Most of the furnishings have been taken out, Nancy thought. I suppose the movers will be back for the other odds and ends. She made a careful tour of the first floor. All but one room had been virtually emptied. This was a small study. As Nancy entered it, she noticed that the rug lay rolled up and tied, while some of the furniture had evidently been shifted in readiness for moving. Funny, I didn't hear anything about the Tophams deciding to give up their cottage, she murmured, and I must say those moving men were awfully careless. A vague suspicion that had been forming in the back of Nancy's mind now came into startling focus. Those men may not have been movers, she burst out. They may be thieves. At once Nancy thought of the dark gray van which had stopped at the Turners. Those men may be the same ones who robbed them. That would explain, Nancy thought fearfully, the evidences of the truck's hasty departure. Probably the thieves were scared away when I sounded my horn. Nancy glanced about uneasily. What if the men were still nearby, watching for a chance to return and pick up the remaining valuables? The realization that she was alone, some distance from the nearest house, swept over her. A tingling sensation crept up Nancy's spine, but resolutely she shook off her nervousness. At least I must see if the Crowley clock is still here, Nancy reminded herself, and then went through the bungalow again. She found no trace of the timepiece, however. I guess the thieves took that too, Nancy concluded. I'd better report this robbery to the police right now. She looked about for a phone, but there was none. I'll have to drive to the nearest state police headquarters. Nancy started toward the front door. Passing a window, she glanced out, then paused in sheer fright. A man, wearing a cap pulled down low over his eyes, was stalking up the driveway toward the cottage. He was not tall and slender like the caretaker. This stranger was rather short and heavy-set. This man fits the Turner's description. He must be one of the thieves that stole the silver heirlooms, Nancy thought wildly. Chapter 12. A Desperate Situation. For a moment Nancy stood frozen to the spot, positive that the man who was coming to the Topham cottages was one of the thieves. But she hesitated only an instant. Then she turned and ran back into the study. Too late, she realized that she had trapped herself, for this room had no other door. Nancy started back toward the living room, but before she had taken half a dozen steps, she knew that the escape had been cut off from that direction. The man had reached the porch steps. It won't do a bit of good to talk to him, she reasoned. I'll hide, and when he leaves, I'll follow him in my car and report him to the police. Frantically, the young sleuth glanced about for a hiding place. A closet offered the only possible refuge. She scurried inside and closed the door. Nancy was not a second too soon. She had scarcely shut the door when she heard the tread of the man's heavy shoes on the floor just outside. Peeping cautiously through the tiny crack in the door, she saw the heavy-set man come into the study. His face wore a cruel expression. As he turned toward the closet where she huddled, Nancy hardly dared to breathe, lest her presence be detected. Apparently, the man noticed nothing amiss, because his eyes rested only casually on the door. Nancy's hiding place was anything but comfortable. It was dark and musty, and old clothing hung from nails on the walls. As dust assailed her nostrils, she held a handkerchief to her face. If I sneeze, he'll surely find me, she told herself. She felt around and once came close to ripping her hand on a sharp nail. Then she came upon something soft on a shelf and imagined that it was a sleeping cat. She drew back, then touched it more cautiously. Only an old fur cat, she told herself in disgust. Ooh, now I feel like sneezing more than ever. She held one hand over her mouth hard and waited in agony, but presently the desire to sneeze passed, and Nancy breathed more freely. When she dared to peep out through the crack a second time, she saw that the two other rough-looking men had come into the room. One was short and stout, the other taller. Nancy was sure that neither of these two men were the caretaker, because Helen Corning had mentioned that the man was skinny. The heavy-set man who had come in first seemed to be the leader, for he proceeded to issue orders. "Get a move on," he growled. "We haven't got all day unless we want to be caught. That girl you saw, Jake, may be back any time from the shore, and she just might get snoopy." The man addressed as Jake scowled. "What's the matter with you, Sid? Going chicken? If the girl comes around, we'll just give her a smooth story and send her on her way." "Cut out the yakking," said Sid. "Parky, you and Jake take that desk out of here." There was no doubt in Nancy's mind. She was trapped by a clever gang of thieves. She could only continue to watch and listen helplessly from her hiding place. The two men lifted the heavy piece of furniture and started with it to the door, but they did not move swiftly enough to satisfy the leader, and he berated them savagely. Jake turned on him. "If you're in such a hurry, why don't you bring the van back to the driveway instead of leaving it hidden on that road in the woods?" "And have someone driving past here see us?" sneered the leader. "Now get going." Little by little the men stripped the room of everything valuable. Nancy was given no opportunity to escape. Sid remained in the room while the others made several trips to the van. "Well, I guess we have all the stuff that's worth anything now," Sid muttered at last. He turned to follow his companions, who already had left the room, but in the doorway he paused for a final careful survey of the room. At that same moment, Nancy felt an uncontrollable urge to sneeze. She tried to muffle the sound, but to no avail. The thief wheeled about. "Hey, what?" Walking directly to the closet, he flung open the door. Instantly he spotted Nancy and angrily jerked her out. "Spying on us, eh?" he snarled. Nancy faced the man defiantly. "I wasn't spying on anyone." "Then what were you doing in that closet?" the thief demanded, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I came to see the caretaker." "Looking for him in a funny place, ain't you?" the man sneered. Nancy realized that she was in a desperate situation, but she steeled herself not to show any of her inward fears. "I must keep calm," she told herself firmly. Aloud, she explained coolly, "I heard someone coming and I just felt a bit nervous." "Well, you are going to be a lot more nervous," the man said threateningly. "This will be the last time you will ever stick your nose in business that doesn't concern you." A fresh wave of fright swept over Nancy, but resolutely she held on to her courage. "You have no right to be here, helping yourself to the Topham's furniture," she retorted. "You should be turned over to the police." "Well, you'll never get the chance to do it," the ringleader laughed loudly. "You'll wish you'd never come snooping around here. I'll give you the same treatment the caretaker got." "The caretaker?" Nancy gasped in horror. "What have you done to him?" "You'll find out in good time." Nancy gave a sudden agile twist, darted past the man, and raced for the door. The thief gave a cry of rage, and in one long leap overtook her. He caught Nancy roughly by the arm. "Think you're smart, eh?" he growled. "Well, I'm smarter." Nancy struggled to get away. She twisted and squirmed, kicked and clawed, but she was helpless in the vise-like grip of the powerful man. "Let me go!" Nancy cried, struggling harder. "Let me go!" Sid, ignoring her pleas, half-dragged her across the room. Opening the closet door, he flung her inside. Nancy heard a key turn. "Now you can spy all you want," Sid sneered, "but to make sure nobody'll let you out, I'll just take this key along." When Nancy could no longer hear the tramp of his heavy boots, she was sure Sid had left the house. For a moment a feeling of great relief engulfed her, but the next instant Nancy's heart gave a leap. As she heard the muffled roar of the van starting up in the distance, a horrifying realization gripped her. "They've left me here to starve," she thought frantically. So the next chapter is chapter 13, The Frustrating Wait. And I'm going to be reading that next time. Hope you guys liked it. Bye.